Read, write, edit, play, repeat. Let's do this. Thank you, Zach. That's cool. Thanks, man. All right, we'll get right to it then. Going to the cutout, we are looking at an article called 10 Terrible Writing Ideas That Shouldn't Work But Sometimes Do. I'm the one who wrote this article and did that for LitReactor, and we'll just talk through these things now. A lot of the things that I would share about it I kind of have in the opening, but obviously there's a lot of bad ideas out there in writing. Oh, you're welcome, Devil, probably. A lot of bad ideas out there in writing, but these are ones that a lot of times don't work out for folks, but sometimes they do, and ultimately you kind of have to pick a path that's going to lead to success for you. And most people who pick that path won't succeed. So that's kind of the dilemma when it comes to trying to make something out of writing. So we'll look at what I wrote about here, and I'll kind of expound on some of those things as we go along. So again, 10 terrible writing ideas that shouldn't work, but sometimes do. Let's just admit it right up front. There are way more than 10 terrible writing ideas, and we've all tried a few of them. I could work on this article every day for the rest of my life and never list them all. They're trying to catalog every terrible writing idea would be yet another terrible writing idea. Still, for every terrible idea, there is someone out there who made it work, the exception that proves the rule. Every path cut through the literary world was difficult on some level. It was hard for the first person who took it. It still wasn't easy for those who followed years down the line. Years down the line, when everyone has tried it, the path is flooded with hungry writers, and more are failing on that path than succeeding. Then it's time to take a step back and ask whether this particular idea is good anymore. After a while, every idea about writing looks terrible. Other ideas were bad moves from the beginning, but there is always that handful of writers that get away with it. We value things that are exceptional, but by definition, they are created by the exceptions. So sometimes we have to consider ideas that look terrible. We shouldn't try every bad idea that comes along, but there are times we should consider trying to be the exception. There are lots of terrible ideas for you to choose from. Here are 10. All right, first terrible idea that shouldn't work but sometimes does, self-publishing. This is one that, of course, I've done, and many other authors have tried as well. So let's take a look at it. There are lots of reasons this could be considered a terrible idea. All the traditionally published authors who look down on self-publishing tell you it's a bad idea with a sincere sneer painted across their faces. What reason would they have to discourage your publishing efforts other than the most genuine concern for your career, right? When the gatekeepers are removed from your path, it is up to you whether you use an editor, follow conventions for formatting, pay anything for cover art, use page numbers, print the words upside right, or fill the book with dream sequences and mirror scenes. Some of that stuff costs money. When writers decide to pass the savings of no editing on like a gift no one asked for, people notice. People notice, and the readers join the veterans with sincere sneers. Then there's the fact that so many of these books don't sell a copy beyond friends and family. The ones that do sell beyond blood relations, on average, make a fraction of 1 month's rent over a lifetime. Terrible idea. But then there are a number of exceptions. I was at a convention and heard a traditionally published author whose fame stretched back to before ebooks confide in a hero of mine that he didn't know who some of the other authors in the celebrity room were. He hadn't seen their books in bookstores or read about them in any of his magazines. My hero told him that they sell a lot on Amazon. Most of them self-publish, and some of them are making more than you and me right now. It's true, there are a number of self-published authors paying their own editors, cover artists, making six figures a year, every year, who have a pocket of rabidly loyal fans. Now the publishers are cash chasing them with advance offers that would make your head spin. They accomplished a lot with a terrible idea. I do think one thing I touched on here and didn't go into very as deeply is that if you do choose the path of self-publishing, there are people that are going to look down on that. Now, some of that bad reputation is earned because there are a lot of examples of poor editing, bad cover art, bad formatting, all sorts of things, and bad storytelling that kind of litter Amazon with self-published books that aren't great. Now, within those, as a reader, speaking as a reader and a fellow author, there is some great work, and some that stands out exceptional from even stuff that's published by the big presses. Some of it being that the author is free to just be as creative as they like. Now, of course, with someone that doesn't put in the work, that experiment can lead to trouble. But I think some of the best work is from the indie writers out there. But again, many of them are the exceptions. A traditionally published author would probably tell you it's a bad idea, and for a lot of people it is probably a bad idea. But I do have a policy that I don't take advice from certain types of people. I don't take advice from people who don't like me. I don't take advice from people who don't like what I do. And I don't take advice from people who don't care about my success. Now, it's not that a person who doesn't like me doesn't have things that I can learn from them, but I'm just not going to take career advice from them because they don't necessarily have my best interests at heart. I can probably find another traditionally published author who does like me, who does care about my success, and that would be a better source for advice. So a lot of people will look down on paths like self-publishing, but a lot of that comes down to the fact that many of them feel like you're kind of taking their audience in some ways. So again, be careful who you take advice from. Number 2, another terrible idea that shouldn't work but sometimes does, starting a press. The joke goes like this: how do you make a small fortune running a small press? The answer is you start with a large fortune. I recently cataloged every story and novel I ever wrote with a detailed submission and publishing history for each one. There were a lot of rejections. I got to where it was faster to just cut and paste the word rejection instead of typing it over and over. Most of those publishers, among all those rejections and acceptances over the last decade plus, are gone now. Some of them paid pro rates and were fixtures in the publishing industry of various genres. They disappeared overnight, and successful authors were left with homeless novels that had been making them money before. Most new presses fail and cost more money than they make over a lifetime. As they start to go bad, desperate publishers are put in a position of having to close down or break promises to authors. Unfortunately, there's way too many examples of publishers that used to do well that suddenly stop communicating with their authors. They stop sending royalty payments, and too many authors that I know who are very talented and put up great books ended up not getting all the money that they deserved. Then there are the exceptions. Some of the greatest work I've read in any given year came from indie presses that made good on a dream to publish stories they wanted to see. The biggest payouts I've seen and other authors have gotten came from these presses that took a chance. As most fall away, some of them thrive and evolve the genre. So again, it's very tricky to open your own press. A lot of people would advise against it, but there are some great independent presses out there. Number 3, another idea that's terrible but works for some people: spamming, I mean self-promoting. Buy my book is the worst advertising slogan ever imagined in human history. The line between self-promoting and outright spamming is thin, and many writers blunder over that line with abandon. A number of Facebook groups have spam Saturdays where they try to cram all the spam into one day so they can argue politics in peace the rest of the week. They don't call it spam, but you get the idea. We dress up newsletters when all we really care about are the links at the bottom and the potential buyers' inboxes. But if you call the list a community, there is more nobility in it. We develop personal and professional brands online. Are you the funny one? Are you the wise one? Inspiring, controversial, crazy, self-deprecating? Do you offer value to other writers? Whichever one you are, you try to figure out the perfect ratio of brand value posts to disguised spam posts in order to not be that guy. Promotion is necessary for people to know your work is out there, but we desperately don't want to be the guy who posts his book link on everyone's wall and invites them to his author page 10 seconds after they make the mistake of accepting his friend request. When people ask for book recommendations, that guy recommends his own. When there is a national tragedy, that guy posts a book link and says it's exactly like the plot of his novel. And yet, every successful author who sits on a panel to talk about how they made it has at least one story of something they did that would be seen as wildly unprofessional, that guy behavior, and it worked for them anyway. They walked into a publisher without an appointment. They bothered an editor when they caught him eating at a restaurant. They mailed themselves to an agent and somehow didn't get arrested. They spammed the old message boards to ask their unwitting network to buy their book. And it worked. It shouldn't have. It was wrong. It was unprofessional and amateurish, but it worked. This is still a terrible idea, and you are a terrible person if you cross this line, but everyone needs a story when they get on that panel. All right, number 4, terrible idea that shouldn't work but sometimes does in writing, using unpopular points of view. Second person point of view narratives are rarely discussed in literary circles because they are generally seen as off-putting. They are the storytelling device of choose-your-own-adventure books and role-playing games. Quote here, you open the door to the dungeon and you're hit by the sulfurous odor of accumulated dragon farts. Roll to see if the sudden introduction of oxygen creates a backdraft, igniting the entire labyrinth. At various points in time, first-person narratives were seen as lesser than third-person. Then first-person present tense with shifting point of view characters were seen as the stuff of young adult novels. When young adult novels started selling really well, more people adopted it for a book or 3. And there are people I know who made good money with a second-person narrative in a novel. So what do any of us really know? Okay, number 5, terrible idea that shouldn't work but sometimes does, writing what you don't know. I've edited and read more than one novel from a white American writing stories set in or about characters from Mexico. I'm not saying they're all bad stories, but all the ones I've encountered have been. They think they know because they visited the country more than once. Not really in the neighborhoods they are writing about, but they walked a block or 2 down a sketchy street between their hotel and the 2-story bar that plays Jimmy Buffett all day. These books are not well received. They don't exactly capture the authentic experience or thoughts of a real human character. Unless you are going to write about someone with your job working in your town, you're going to venture out of your life in big and small ways. Many authors turn to research and expert beta readers to fact check them. They do the best they can to fill in the rest. Still, with all that research, male authors are notoriously bad about writing female characters as if they are life support systems for bouncing boobs. But against all odds, occasionally, through great effort, a few authors manage to write about other cultures, other genders, other ways of life, and other worlds in realistic and sensitive ways. Some of you should avoid the risk until you understand the work that goes into pulling this off. But maybe you're not the kind of person who's interested in my sincere sneer. You almost always have to write a character that's not you at some point, and there's all sorts of ways to do that effectively. Research is one. Actually interacting with people that are like that character is another. But then there are also limits to that. You gotta have to recognize your shortcomings. So if you're not familiar with the culture, you may be taking a risk to write about that culture because very likely you're going to be pulling up surface level discussions that are going to really weaken your book. You're considering doing number 8. We'll get there, man. We'll talk about it there. All right, number 6, cliches. Mirror scenes, flashbacks, dream sequences, returning to a spooky hometown with a troubled history, the dramatic speech to win the girl back, a long farewell from a man bleeding out, the family who won't leave the haunted house in time, the cabin nestled in the woods with the guy-girl who has given up on love until someone new shows up, and the gay best friend in your cozy mystery about your perky heroine, who are some of the best cliches. But the list goes on. These fallbacks often indicate a lack of creative effort. They are easy and found at the top of your brain. They allow you to fill out your story outline faster. Then there are readers who read these books as fast as you can write them. Formulaic is bad, and yet formulas work for a number of people. Sometimes life is a mystery that requires you and your gay best friend to close up the coffee shop you opened after your divorce because you just heard about a murder that only you can solve for some reason. So again, it's good to do your best to try to be unique, avoid cliches, avoid stereotypes. But there are occasions when you're writing a particular character that falls into a particular category, and you just have to do the best you can with that. All right, number 7, changing or chasing genres. The conventional wisdom is to write what you love, because if you try to chase a trend in publishing, it will be over before you get there. But someone is cashing in, aren't they? And is it always the wrong choice? Sometimes you learn to love something new and it happens to be selling better than what you used to write. There is a lot of risk in changing genre based on financial considerations. Then there is risk in ignoring financial realities in the market too. There are times we have trouble differentiating between integrity and the refusal to grow or evolve. My favorite joke about integrity is this. You know those kernels at the bottom of the popcorn bag that didn't pop? You should appreciate those more because those were the ones with integrity. Some horror authors have crossed over to crime fiction with great success. Authors who only wrote zombie stories expanded and became better writers for it. I know a number of authors who published romance under pen names with success. I also know a few who tried to chase the market only to lose their sense of self. Who knows what you're meant to do until you try a few terrible ideas. All right, number 8 here. This is the one I think Zach was talking about. Starting a podcast. Now, of course, I have to caveat this with the fact that I've started them, and many authors that I associate with have their podcasts, and we interview each other and all sorts of people. So if it's a terrible idea, it's one that I and many others have tried. So let's talk about starting a podcast as a terrible idea. The 2 happiest days in a boat owner's life are the day they buy the boat and the day they sell it. The same may be true of starting and ending podcasts. There are enough out there already if you're worried something might be missing. Authors often start podcasts as a mode of promoting their books, and then they sell no more books, and the podcast takes up all their writing time. As with most things writers start experimenting with, the place gets saturated with writers, and they drown each other out. It might work, though. Every guest is another point of contact in your network. You learn tricks from other people, and listeners get to know you. I have favorite podcasts that I follow regularly. When I'm deciding on books, I lean toward people whose voices speak to me, and I've been listening to some of their voices speaking to me weekly. So again, there is a lot of work that goes into a podcast and a lot of build-up, but it's not necessarily an idea that isn't going to work for you depending on what your goals are. All right, number 9. Terrible idea that might just work. Starting a Patreon. Again, here's another one that I've definitely done. And I'm making some money from it. I've written at length on the pros and cons of the viability of Patreon as an income source for authors in another LitReactor article. I have a Patreon page that supplements my income. I've also worked on developing Twitch as an author platform and have just begun monetizing my efforts over on my channel. When it comes to bad ideas on new platforms, I'm the first to run into a brick wall as soon as I get my shoes tied. Most people make no money and others stick with it until they beat the odds. I do have a theory about platforms like this, whether it be Patreon or Twitch or anything else that an author tries to use. There is an advantage to getting there before everybody else. So if you can get in when it's still relatively new for authors, then you kind of give yourself time to work it out and come up with things that might draw attention before everybody else tries it. And then especially if it's a platform that has a bit of a learning curve. I know a bunch of authors that can do video. I know a bunch of authors that can do live video, like on Facebook or even occasionally on YouTube. I do know authors that have their own podcasts, so they're comfortable on the air. But there is something different about live streaming regularly the way Twitch does. There's different skills that go into it that have to be learned. And as I've been doing this over time, I've been kind of learning those things. And one approach that I take with this that can also work a lot of other places is the concept of 1% improvement. So I'm constantly watching videos, most of which are geared toward video game streamers. And they talk about best practices and things that they do, things that work, things that might not. and I've tried to figure out how those might apply to me. Now, if I tried to do all that stuff all at once, I'd be overwhelmed. So whether it's Patreon, whether it's social media, whether it's a publishing idea, whether it's Twitch, one of my approaches is just to get 1% better. So if there's something I can do, a small change I can make, adjustments I can do, a little trick I can try that makes the stream just 1% better, then over time that really does add up. I'll admit the novelty of a writer utilizing Twitch as a platform is part of the reason I initially followed you on here. That's great, Zach. I appreciate that. I was curious to see how an author could use it. And there are other writers on here as well. Every time I find one, even if they're brand new, I jump over and kind of see what they're doing and encourage them. I do think the more people we do get on here, readers and writers, I think there will be improvement in quality. We'll learn from each other. We'll improve each other. But there is an advantage to kind of being one of the only guys in my circles that's doing this. I've drawn the curiosity of other authors and publishers, and I do think it's gotten me some attention from them. And of course, gradually the platform is becoming a monetary source for me, and you can always use as many diversified sources of writing income as you can, especially if you're doing this full time like I am. So with Patreon and everything else, you're going to start small and you're going to build up, and you're going to plateau. So the most common thing I see on Patreon is authors getting to a certain level, $1, $2, $3, $400, and then they plateau there for a while, and then there's another building phase to go up from there. And that's the phase, I think, where 1% improvement over time really does work. Also, something that's constantly talked to about video game streamers that I think would work for writers and variety streamers as well is the idea of finding what makes you unique. So that can be something small. I think for me, for all the things I try on here, the one thing that I'm doing that I think is different from a lot of other people is that when I do type a story, I can speak it out loud as I'm typing. Most authors and writers on Twitch, and some of which are very successful, often are doing writing sprints where they'll talk to people for a while, and then it's kind of 15 minutes of silence or music as they're writing, and other people are writing with them, which is great. There's people that definitely works for, especially authors that just want a writing buddy. But I think what I found unique was the ability to kind of tell a story as I was typing it. So that's something I do on stream a good bit, simply because that is the thing that makes me unique. Now, I don't necessarily think that'll automatically make me X number of times more successful than everybody else, but it is my path of uniqueness, which gives me something that would differentiate as I grow over time. And I do agree with that, Zach. I do think it appeals to more readers. It was the one thing I could figure out that made writing on stream work. Like, lots of authors can do readings online, and they do them all the time, and I love them. But there's something raw and different and unique about the idea of sitting on stream and creating before your eyes. Like, you're actually you're actually performing the writing process live, speaking your thoughts out loud and all these things, and then going back to edit those stories. Not only is it valuable for me as an author, but I think other writers and readers looking in can find interest in the idea of, okay, the way you're improving a story sometimes is the small pieces. Like, I'm going to add a little bit in here. There's something missing. It's a good story that's just I'm trying to make a little better, or it's a story that's not working that I'm just trying to make work. So all those things I think make pretty good streams, and all this content that I create through Twitch, I can edit down to pieces for YouTube. I can have that be content for Patreon, and especially if you can work your platforms and your efforts so that they kind of feed into each other. In this case, I guess I'm talking about Twitch kind of feeding up into other platforms I was already doing, or now that Twitch is monetized for me, kind of funneling all my efforts down into the area so that I'm kind of pulling everybody down into sort of Patreon and Twitch as platforms for me. So all of that stuff's in progress, but whatever platforms you choose, whether it's Patreon or whatever else, there's going to be a lot of people that don't make it work. So that makes it look like a terrible idea. But all of it is the exceptions are the ones that keep working at it. So they keep building over time, and they get past sort of those plateaus where it seems like they're making a little bit of money from it, but they're not seeing the growth yet. And that's where all that work comes in. So the last one, and this one may be a little tongue in cheek, but there are actually people that try to shape their image to be more appealing, which again, I don't have any problem with branding and that kind of thing. But it's one worth discussing here to close out the article. So last terrible idea that shouldn't work but sometimes does is being yourself. If you take nothing else away from this article, know that this is the worst idea of all. This one carries the most risk. The smart money is on having a brand that doesn't alienate any potential readers. Don't share polarizing opinions on social media. Don't open up too much to the public. Be consistent with the image you want readers to believe and buy into. But ultimately, you have to live with your choices, though. You have to decide what risks to take. Those who advise you not to try something new aren't putting you on their payroll. It's your path to walk and your success to pursue. Some terrible ideas are terrible at their core, and following them is not true to who you are. Others are the kind of risks you are uniquely fit to take. It's sort of the kind of things that don't work for most people, but might just work for you because of who you are and where your skills lie, where your interests lie. That which makes you unique will be your best chance to stand out from the crowd of other writers trying to gain success as well. You might still fail and have to pick another terrible idea, but you have to be the exception in order to be exceptional. So again, that was 10 terrible ideas, writing ideas that shouldn't work but sometimes do.